Good afternoon. Okay, the next speaker is Dr. Terry Schulze. He is with the New Jersey State Department of Health. He has been active in Lyme disease investigations essentially geared toward the ecology and control since before the organism was discovered. So he brings us a great deal of knowledge on control of this tick today and some of the ecology of the tick in New Jersey, and it's very applicable to New York State as well. Terry.
Have the slide projector on, please. Thank you. Perhaps the key thing I want to get across today in an attempt to the key is an attempt to control the principal vector of Lyme disease, the northern deer tick, Ixodes damini. By now you are quite familiar with this organism. It is an arachnid, not an insect. It's more closely related to spiders and mites. Like other medically important ticks in this area, it is a three-host tick. That is, it must locate and feed upon a host 3 distinct times to complete its life cycle. It has 3 active stages, the larva shown all the way to the left, the nymph. The largest specimen in the middle there is a female. The scutum, the dark area behind the mouth parts, is uniformly dark brown to black in color, and in life the abdomen is brick red, very distinctive tick. The male is a bit duller, uniformly dark brown to black in color, and located all the way on the right. Very important factors in controlling the deer tick and devising control strategies is an understanding of the tick biology, tick behavior, tick habitat. And before I get into different studies that have been done on controlling this organism, I want to spend a few minutes trying to acquaint you with some of these ecological things that I think are very important. As I indicated, the life cycle of the tick takes about 2 years to complete. In the fall of the year, the adult tick starts to look for hosts, called questing. It's on low-lying vegetation, favors location and feeding upon larger animals. The adult ticks are capable of mating on vegetation, but normally accomplish that while a female is feeding on the host animal. The female overwinters on the host, drops off the following spring, digests the blood, and lays a batch of eggs, typically 1,000 to 2,000 in number. Those eggs mature and hatch the following summer, typically late July and early August in these areas. The larvae look for hosts, find a host, feed, overwinter, and become nymphs the following spring. Right now we're just about completing the nymph cycle in the Long Island, New Jersey area. The nymph then must find another host and feed. Once it does, it will drop off, digest the blood, and molt to the adult in the fall. So that the life cycle really takes about 2 years. If you look at the slide, you see that almost for all stages, a variety of animals or hosts are listed. This tick is not host specific. It will feed almost on anything that moves. But because of its questing behavior, how it looks for hosts, it favors some type of animals over others. And that can be illustrated by looking at another example of the tick life cycle, except with a vertical component. If you look midway on the slide all the way to the left-hand side, you can see that the adult female deposits the eggs. These eggs hatch and become the 6-legged larva, the first active stage. At this point, the larval tick is not infected. There is very little transovarial passage through the egg stage, so that the larvae are essentially clean and free of spirochetes. The larvae quest at ground level, look for hosts at ground level, which tends to favor location and feeding upon small rodents, typically white-footed mice, but also squirrels and chipmunks and birds, and occasionally larger animals if they encounter them. During its first feeding, the larva has an opportunity to become infected if it feeds on an infected animal. It'll drop off, digest the blood, and molt to the next stage, the nymph. The spirochetes it acquired from that blood meal are taken with it to the next stage. So the spirochete is transstadially passed. The nymph now, when it feeds a second time, has the ability to transmit the spirochete. It'll drop off, and after digesting the blood, will molt to the adult stage. Now, unlike the subadults, the adults climb on low-lying vegetation, and this kind of behavior favors the location of larger animals. So adults typically will be found more frequently on things like raccoon, opossum, fox, certainly deer, and humans. Slide shows the month of onset of cases in New Jersey, and I'm sure it's very similar to what happens here on Long Island. The vast majority of cases, 70% or more, occur during the months of May through August. But I would point out that we have cases with months of onset from every month of the year. If you look at these graphs, the top is the seasonal distribution of larval ticks. They're found primarily in August and September and some in October. You may find some also in the early season. While most of the ticks are found in late July and August, we have intermittent feeding. Some adults acquire blood meals in the fall, others don't. They overwinter and look for hosts again the following spring. The second graph shows the seasonal distribution of nymphs. And if you recall the previous slide, and I can go back to it, you'll see that the nymphs occur at about the same time when the vast majority of cases occur. So from an epidemiological point of view, we do have an association here which is unmistakable. Nymphs are the most important stage of the deer tick with respect to Lyme disease transmission. The bottom slide shows again that the adult ticks are active in the fall and again the following spring. Those smaller peaks there in April and May actually represent remnants of the previous fall's population. So clearly, while most of the cases are the result of exposure to nymphal ticks, adult ticks are quite capable of transmitting the spirochete, so that even though you've passed the months of May and June and into July, if you're active in the fall of the year or during warming trends in the wintertime, you may be exposed to deer tick adults. The reason we don't see huge numbers of cases in comparison is that adult ticks are considerably larger. They're able to be observed and removed before they've had a chance to feed. There are far fewer people in tick habitats in the fall versus the summer, and people who are in tick habitats generally wear more clothing, providing barriers to actual feeding. If I was asked to describe an ideal tick habitat associated with coastal plain physiographic regions, like Long Island, like the southern half of New Jersey, I would show this slide. This is what I would consider ideal tick habitat. It's mixed hardwood forest with some pines and has a very lush shrub layer, typically high bush or low bush blueberries, huckleberries, awful lot of catbrier, it seems, at least in my study sites. And what we believe happens here and why these ticks are found in great numbers in these habitats is because this lush shrub layer provides a great deal of humidity, at least at the micro level, and the ticks are able to do much better than they would in habitats like lawns or athletic fields. Even though this area may have 100 ticks per square yard, it doesn't really matter if no one actually goes into the areas. But when we encourage people to come into what was tick habitat, either for recreational purposes or we construct housing developments or whatever, we start to put people at risk. In the next few slides, I want to go over what some of the typical habitats or plant communities there are in this coastal plain physiographic region, and try to give you some association of what we can expect in the way of ticks. Ticks are not a wetland species. This is obviously a wetland. You can see water. You don't have to be a wetland scientist to figure it out. And here we have a forested area made up of different trees than the one I've shown previously. And the difference here is that this is a palustrine wetland forest. You'll note that there's very little shrub layer, and the reason for that is water is at or near the surface of a woodland like this for an extended period, usually during the winter, and apparently ticks are not able to survive this intermittent flooding. So I would not expect to find a lot of ticks here. In monocultures of pine, generally they're quite dense and very little light gets through. I'm standing in a clearing, that's why you can see some light when I took this picture. Generally, the ground layer vegetation is comprised of grasses. I don't have a pointer, but if you were to look over to the middle right-hand side of the slide, you would begin to see some shrubby vegetation, which would be a place to start looking for ticks. This is a field habitat, great for American dog ticks, Dermacentor variabilis, very poor for deer ticks. Again, we believe is that there are a variety of hosts that deer ticks use that are not found here, and that the humidity is such that it adversely affects the very sensitive deer tick. Yes?
You made it sound before that the tick is not very particular as to who it's supposed to be, and then you would say in that field environment you would find those kinds of...
Well, in that field environment, the mammals that I would expect to find there are perhaps shrews and meadow voles, and neither of those are used by deer ticks unless they happen to pass by. I mean, we have seen them, but they primarily utilize animals like white-footed mice and squirrels. I personally believe the major reason for them not being present there is that the lack of humidity. They are very prone to desiccation. But as the field gets older, goes into woody succession, we begin to see these shrub layer species come in, and ticks start to become abundant in old fields. Lawns are perhaps the least attractive habitat for deer ticks. They provide really very little protection against sunlight. They're very low in humidity, and in manicured lawns, whether they be grassy areas in residences or athletic fields or whatever, they generally are exposed to multiple applications of insecticides, which again provide a hostile environment. While we're on this slide, I want to point out a very important factor in designing deer tick control techniques. In the foreground, we have a manicured lawn. In the background, we have a mature forest. In between, there is a transition zone between one plant community and another, and this is called an ecotone. And ecologists tell me that the ecotone, or edge, if you will, harbors the greatest number of hosts and consequently the greatest number of the host parasites and the greatest species diversity. So in these transition zones between one plant community and the other, we would expect to find the majority of hosts for the deer tick and consequently the greatest number of deer ticks. In the last 20 years or so, the nature of residential development has changed rather dramatically. In the 40s and 50s, wooded areas were essentially clear-cut, trees were bulldozed and logged off, and houses were constructed on what were essentially open fields, providing very little habitat for deer ticks. In contrast, in the 70s and particularly the 80s, a lot of these rural communities tried to preserve the rural nature of their communities, and in fact, in many situations would insist that the indigenous vegetation remain intact where possible. This particular development was about 80 acres of mature forest about 15 years ago. Normally, before it was developed, its edge was comprised of the perimeter of the forest. With this woodsy lane type of development, it's called, roads are cut in, houses are constructed, driveways are constructed, there may be outbuildings or whatever, and the bottom line is that the amount of edge is increased dramatically. Also, a lot of the hosts for deer ticks will use structure, either for harborage or for nesting, particularly chipmunks and gray squirrels. In certain situations, houses not only have an edge around the actual lawn, but incorporate islands of the indigenous vegetation, ideal tick habitat, right into the landscaping. These areas serve as islands of refuge for a wide variety of animals during nearby construction, during hunting season, and they almost tend to congregate animals. People who move out here will invariably set up bird feeders. These will attract birds and also any of the deer ticks that are on them. We heard yesterday that birds certainly can serve as hosts, in some cases even as reservoirs for the infection, but I think birds' primary role in Lyme disease is the fact that they're able to transmit infected deer ticks over very large areas in a very short period of time. And I think they're primarily responsible for the rapid geographical expansion we've seen of Lyme disease over the past decade. Finally, people who move into areas like this are generally trying to escape urban blight. They're a lot more familiar with cockroaches than they are ticks, and it takes them quite a while to adjust to the fact that you just can't go take a nice leisurely walk in the woods anymore without offering yourself some sort of protection against ticks. In New Jersey, the top 5 counties with respect to Lyme disease case reports are also the top 5 counties with respect to residential development. So I think there's a very definite correlation in the way we are developing our residential communities now. Now I want to move into a discussion of several different kinds of control techniques. The first study done to my knowledge to control deer ticks was done in an island situation off of Massachusetts. And the intent of the study was to eliminate what was then thought to be the most important host in the Lyme disease cycle, that is the white-tailed deer. The study intended to live trap white-tailed deer, remove them from the island, and then study the impact on the deer tick population. The researchers found that it is a great deal easier to live trap deer on paper than it is in real life, and they ended up actually killing the animals, I think all but one. They followed the study for a year and published the data, and it indicated that there had not been a major impact on the deer tick population. While I'd argue that the study wasn't conducted long enough before they published, I'm told now that there has been a reduction in the deer tick population. What I'm concerned about is, from a scientific point of view, is that what you can accomplish by doing something like this in an island situation cannot be automatically assumed to work in a mainland situation. Dr. Bossler tells me that we have places on Long Island, I think it's Bethpage State Park, that have not had deer for 30 years or so, and there is a Lyme disease problem. In that situation, he believes raccoons have substituted for deer as the principal host for adult ticks. Let's take it out of the scientific realm and put it into the practical realm. It is very doubtful that this important game animal would be subjected to wholesale slaughter. We have a municipality in New Jersey, Princeton Township, that has not allowed hunting for perhaps 10 years, and they have a 400% increase in the number of deer-car collisions. They also have a very significant Lyme disease problem. They've asked for our recommendations on that, and our feeling is that if you were to eliminate all deer from Princeton Township, the deer from the neighboring townships would immediately exploit that wide open niche in the resources. So again, I don't think this has any scientific merit. I envision any recommendations to do something like remove deer from an area to be met with vigorous dissent from both hunters and animal rights activists, something that you wouldn't really expect to see, those two groups lobbying for the same thing. The second type of control strategy would be habitat modification. It could be physical destruction of shrub layer species with weed whackers or sickles or whatever, or it could incorporate control burning. There's one published study on this, I think from Massachusetts again, done in the mid-1980s, and the study was conducted in the fall of the year when most control burns are done against the adult ticks. And the research concluded that 70 to 85% of adult ticks could be eliminated from an area with either control burn or with physical destruction. And that control, done in the fall, existed through the following spring, which you would expect. Those ticks that would normally have overwintered and become active in the spring, you've gotten rid of in the fall. But that the following year, the tick populations were back to normal, meaning that this is a temporary type situation and that it had no impact whatsoever on the subadult stages, which are inactive deep in the leaf litter. A control burn is not the same as a forest fire. It's done under controlled conditions, designed to eliminate some of the leaf litter and pine straw without destroying all the surrounding vegetation. So from a scientific point of view, it's a temporary measure unless it's done for several years in a row. From a practical point of view, there are places in New Jersey, and I'm sure there are places on Long Island, where people will spend $250,000 for an acre of residential wooded property. It is unlikely that they will then turn around and clear cut the area and destroy the vegetation. They buy the property because they like the wooded area. So from a practical point of view, I don't see this catching on as a suitable control technique, at least in a suburban area and residential community. Where it might be used is in managed woodland areas, recreational areas, perhaps military facilities, where control burns are done as part of forest management. But to specifically design a control strategy around control burning in a residential situation, I don't see it as being very practical. The next group of studies involve the assessment and use of acaricides. The first one, I'm sure you've heard of this product, it's called Daminex. consists of a cardboard tube filled with acaricide-impregnated cotton balls. It's distributed in mouse habitat, and the idea is that the white-footed mouse, the most important host in this Lyme disease cycle, serving as the major host for both subadult stages as well as the reservoir host from which most of the ticks acquire spirochetes. That this organism will come in, harvest the cotton, bring it back to its nest, and utilize it for nesting material. Any ticks in the nest or on the mouse will subsequently be killed by the acaricide on the cotton. It's a very unique, interesting approach, and it remains very controversial, even though there have been probably a half a dozen 2- or 3-year studies conducted of the material. Researchers who developed the material from Massachusetts claim it is the best thing since sliced bread, that it essentially eliminates Lyme disease from an area. A recent paper that came out from Westchester County just a week or two ago indicated that after 2 or 3 years of study, it had no effect on Lyme disease or tick reduction in Westchester County. Well, we have two different kinds of habitats there. They're not immediately comparable. Studies that have been done in Rhode Island, in Connecticut, and in a joint one on Long Island between New York State Health Department and New Jersey State Health Department have come up with equivocal results. We show here that there is no statistical difference, if somebody would be nice enough to focus that, between Daminex-treated versus untreated areas with respect to free-ranging nymphs. It does a great job in eliminating the ticks on mice, but it has no effect on reducing the number of nymphs in an area that are looking for hosts, that is, looking for you and I. So that it makes the mice feel great, but it really does nothing to eliminate the risk of acquiring infection or exposure to an infected tick. So from that point of view, it is, in our estimation, not the end-all and be-all technique. It may have application in an integrated control program where several techniques are used, but by itself, I don't think it is the absolute solution. The reason for it, I believe, is the fact that deer follow discrete trails, and they may very effectively pick up the ticks from these trails, and these ticks are killed. They do not crisscross areas in a grid-type fashion, and consequently don't pick up all the ticks. So from that perspective, I think we need to look further.
Is it true that the tick is attracted to environment of CO2? That they do tend to congregate where the larger animals, including man, passes frequently?
If I'm asked to go into an area and I have 2 minutes to collect as many ticks as possible, I will look for an animal trail and drag that trail. For some reason, the ticks are able to congregate along animal trails, larger animal trails, even along pathways that smaller animals will use. I don't know why that is. In New Jersey, we have the Lone Star tick, which shares exactly the same habitat. And if I were to set out a CO2 trap in 2 hours, there would be thousands of Lone Star ticks in that trap and not one Ixodes damini. So I think they do respond to CO2, but not to the extent that some other ticks do. The Lone Star tick is a hunting tick. It will seek you out. Primarily, the deer tick will just lie in wait for you on vegetation. They don't respond as well to CO2 as some other medically important ticks. Yes?
I may be confused, but the nymph has not been infected himself. It would be his first meal.
No.
He then had his first meal on a mouse. Why would he have to have the
The first meal that the deer tick has is as a larva. feeds on the mouse. It is uninfected at that point. If that mouse is infected, in all likelihood, the larva will become infected, take that infection with it to the next stage, and then when the nymph feeds, it will be able to transmit.
Larvae not affected by the nymph.
All ticks are effectively eliminated from mice and mouse burrows. But the mouse does not go up and down an area and collect all the ticks from it. It follows discrete trails. So while it is effectively picking up the ticks from a discrete trail in its home range and exposing them to the Daminex, it's doing nothing for the rest of that area that the mouse is not going on. Okay, so it is really not controlling it enough to be any significant factor. In New Jersey, we conducted the first study of what we would term more traditional tick control experiments. If you've been paying attention at all, you should remember two things. First, adult ticks, which is what we were after in this situation, and this is a military facility where a large outbreak of Lyme disease had occurred. Adult ticks are present and active 2 times during the year, in the fall and again the following spring. Both times when deciduous foliage is absent, so that there really aren't any leaves present to intercept the acaricide sprays. Secondly, unlike the subadults, the adult ticks climb on low-lying vegetation. So they're essentially sitting there a foot or two off the ground on bare branches. Essentially, we felt they were sitting ducks. And in fact, the application of some general use over-the-counter materials, one of them is carbaryl, you know it more commonly as 7, and diazinon after 3 days, the bottom right-hand portion of the slide, gave us 97.1 and 100% control of adult ticks from a single application in mid-November. The important aspect of control strategies, you have to know when the tick is present and when it's vulnerable and how to get to it. We followed the tick populations through the next spring, and as expected, the control continued. If you kill the ticks in the fall, there's nothing in that treated area, or very little, to overwinter and become active the following spring. The following fall, however, it was business as usual. The tick population had rebounded and was essentially unchanged from the previous year. Again showing us that a single application against adult ticks, while it can control the adult ticks, and while that might be a desired thing to do in specific situations, is not going to have a desired long-term effect. You could argue that if we made applications to large areas for 2, perhaps 3 years in a row, we could essentially eliminate deer ticks from an area. That study hasn't been done. It would be interesting to see that. What it does show us, though, is that these acaricide applications being made in the fall are unable to penetrate in a liquid form the leaf litter and forest duff to get to the subadult ticks, which are inactive, way deep in the leaf litter. Much the same as the control burn was unable to get to the subadult ticks also. So we thought about the problems we'd have in doing large-scale areas. I mentioned earlier about the edge effect, that the majority of ticks in an area would be congregated along the edge. Forget about this being a road through an area. Pretend it was a hiking trail or exercise path through some local park. We think we could effectively provide protection to people if, say, both sides of that trail were treated. You wouldn't have to treat 500 acres of park as long as people didn't go in the areas they weren't supposed to. What we showed here is, depending on the material, anywhere from about 85 to 100% control of adult deer ticks again. Again, these applications are made in the fall of the year. The problem with making applications of liquid materials during the growing season, when both the nymphs and larvae are present, is that the majority of your chemical is likely to be intercepted by the growing foliage, and that any of the material that drips off will land on the surface of the leaf litter and not penetrate deep into the leaf litter. So traditionally, people have been discouraged from making applications in wooded areas because of feared ineffective treatments. We circumvented this, we thought, by using similar compounds that we used in sprays, but changing to a granular formulation. And by applying this material, it hits the leaf litter, or it hits the top of the vegetation, works its way through because it's granular material, like kitty litter, okay? If you can envision that. And then once it gets into the leaf litter, will work its way through that. Once activated by moisture, the material starts to be effective in controlling ticks. The technique used here, I don't know is available commercially from any pest control operator. I've never heard of a pest control operator trying to apply granular material. This is simply a chest-mounted cyclone seeder. You crank the handle as you walk through the area. As I indicated, those little specks there, if you can see them, show that the material is able to penetrate growing foliage. Quickly, the results we had, we used the first year, 1989, diazinon chlorpyrifos, which you may know as Dursban, and carbaryl, which again is 7, and control against nymphal Ixodes daminae as measured by density on mice ranged from 53.8% with diazinon to nearly to 100% using carbaryl, meaning that in the 4 or 5 acre plot that we applied this material to, we found 3 to 4 to 5 ticks on average on each mouse before the application. After the application, we were unable to find one nymphal deer tick. We also tried this with larval ticks. By the way, this application against nymphs in New Jersey and on Long Island should be made late May, early June, right around that 2-week period. And that's absolutely critical. These compounds do not last long in the environment, so you can't put them down in May and expect them to last 3 months. They won't do it. Against the larvae, we had success in controlling, but not as dramatic as with the nymphs, ranging 66 to about 75% control. We followed, again, the tick populations into the fall, looking at adult ticks. And we found that by making the application to control nymphs, we had a significant impact on the adult population that year. If you look at the plot 4, I believe is carbaryl, was 85% control of the adult population now. And it was as high as almost 99% control with the Dursban, which means that from a single application against the nymphs, we have an immediate impact on the population of nymphs. That stage that transmits the vast majority of Lyme disease cases. We have a delayed effect. We kill them kill the nymphs in the spring. There's very little left in that area to become adults that fall. So we've effectively controlled 2 stages of the deer tick, both of which, incidentally, are the stages capable of transmitting the spirochete. We followed again into the spring of 1990, and we continue to see almost identical control. In 1990, we looked at carbaryl alone. There's nothing magic about any of these chemicals. They're all over-the-counter materials available for use. But carbaryl, during that interim, received EPA registration specifically for deer tick control. The others had been for tick control. Again, we found control to be most successful with the higher rate of carbaryl, about 90% compared to 100% the previous study. Against the larvae, essentially 60% control. In our estimation, larvae are not the organism to go after. We simply can't kill enough of them. And they are at that point not infected. So our recommendation would be to essentially target the nymph deer tick in late May, early June, and we have effective control of both the nymphs as well as the adults in the treated areas. And quickly, because I know we're late for lunch, we tried an aerial application, again using carbaryl this past fall, against adult ticks. It's our feeling that there may be isolated situations when an application is warranted against solely adult ticks. It may be during military maneuvers in October and November. You may want to protect the troops in the field. Hydraulic sprays that I showed you earlier have limitations. They require a large amount of water. They require accessibility to the site, which in remote sites may not be available. So we felt that because of the questing behavior, we would try an aerial application. Again, in the fall, the material is easily penetrating the canopy of the forest because of the lack of foliage. And we essentially achieved this after 48 hours, up to 98.4% control compared to untreated areas, which kind of surprised us. Again, I'm not advocating applications of carbaryl or any other product all over Long Island. All I'm saying is there may be isolated situations where you want to protect a discrete group of people, Girl Scouts or soldiers or whatever. So again, this is just another tool that we have as an option for people who may be interested in controlling deer ticks. I'll stop here. All I wanted to say is that we're not able to guarantee controlling 100% of the ticks 100% of the time, or even 90% of the time. You don't abandon the tried and true prevention activities. You'll hear more about that this afternoon, so I won't go into it. You have to keep up pretending that these ticks are still there. All we're trying to do is cut down on the degree of exposure.
Can I ask you, how did you control the new movement of animals reinfecting the area?
We made no attempts to do that, and we know that in all likelihood, these applications, the single application against nymphs, will have to be made every year. This is an ongoing study. We haven't analyzed the data yet. My gut reaction is that where you have isolated pieces of property, it may be a wooded area that may be surrounded, in this case, by salt marsh or agricultural fields, that by controlling the nymphs in that area, you don't have this continued movement of animals in and out. That probably a single application may last 2 years. I can't say for sure yet, but the degree of isolation of a treated site, it has a lot to do with the success of the treatment.
And can I ask you, do you have any idea of the amount that you use on the spray for your particular purpose?
All right, the liquid spray that we did in 1985 was the same level that is used for gypsy moth control. I believe it's a pound of actual ingredient per acre. I have it all up there in hectares, but Dursban, I think was perhaps 2 pounds, 2.5 pounds. I'd have to go back to the original paper.
Because I'm just thinking that if we, were to aggressively apply something like that to Shelter Island, where there's let's just say for argument's sake that there's 2,000 acres outside of the shoulder that you might want to apply. They're talking 10,000 pounds of carbaryl and 20,000 pounds of Dursban.
Well, that's...
What effect on other wildlife? What effect would that have on the environment? Is it toxic?
Well, there's a bunch of questions. Let me try to answer them all in a general fashion. Maybe I didn't make it clear, but in no way am I advocating that... No.
If the community at large were to cooperate and say, next November, but everybody's going to do their
Yeah, well, let me try to answer the question in general terms. We don't advocate that. What we're trying to come up with is a rational approach, an alternative to reducing exposure to deer ticks. We know, and you'll hear and you'll see the data later on, that about 70 to 75% of all cases are acquired from exposure in or around your place of residence. There's where the application should be targeted. So I wouldn't suggest that you apply to all the properties. We know that a single application against the adults in November is not going to have a significant impact on the deer tick population the following year. It would have to be done over multiple years. The question of effects on non-target organisms, I'll answer this way. Everyone asks that about acaricides, chemical applications. Nobody asks that about controlled burning. What do you think controlled burning does to non-target organisms? You'll see later on this afternoon a very striking comparison between a wooded area with all leaves and fallen branches and old logs, and then the next slide you'll see that all that material is gone and the grass is planted there. In addition to being a lawn mowing nightmare, what do you think that did to the non-target organisms? So there's nothing that isn't a trade-off. If you ask people who have not had Lyme disease, they're the first person that say, well, we're kind of worried about groundwater. But if you ask the same family where the major breadwinner has lost his job because he's unable to work, 2 of the 3 children have had Lyme disease at least once, one of them is on its 3rd round of IV treatment and is hospitalized, and the mother hasn't been feeling very good for a while, that they may have a different approach, that they may feel that impact on non-target organisms is of no consequence to them whatsoever because they're being so dramatically affected by Lyme disease. It's not our intent to sell one way or another. It's to say, we have these materials available. If you want to use them, here they are. 3 years ago, we were barraged by all kinds of requests and complaints. How come the state isn't doing anything about controlling the tick? Why aren't they going out there and spraying? Well, we spent all this time and effort designing when and where and what to use to control these ticks if you want to use them. This is not an attempt to have the state come in and say we're going to go spray all of Long Island. None of us would advocate that. And I believe that the tick population has to be proven to be there before any applications are made. Sure.
I'm not cutting off the questions, but I'd like to make a statement in support of what Terry has just said. I'm your representative from New York State. He's from New Jersey. We have done similar studies with sprays and found them to be very effective. Our mandated job as public health officials, working for the Bureau of Disease Control, is to protect the public's health. Now, all we're doing is designing modalities of applying chemicals that are standard chemicals that are used in agriculture and in mosquito control operations. Certain of these are used in a fashion that we have these in our arsenal for a public health emergency. The recommendations for use of a compound are not issued by the health department. They're issued by the Agricultural Experiment Station at Cornell. The brochure is up here if you want to take a look at that. The approval for the use of that compound is dictated by the Department of Environmental Conservation after they review the Environmental Protection Agency reports on the compound. Generally, our DEC is much more stringent than the U.S. EPA. And so the chemicals that they would permit to be used would be at a certain dosage, a certain type of application for a certain targeted species at a certain point in time by either homeowners, if it's a relatively safe chemical, or by commercial applicators if it has to be applied by a registered applicator in New York. We, in my position, are looking at this, for example, in state parks. As barrier sprays along pathways when the ticks are so bad that people are getting very sick, because we have this I Love New York campaign, come to New York State, pay money to camp in our parks and leave our state with Lyme disease. And I've heard several things about loss of tourist trade from Fire Island and from Shelter Island, et cetera. So we have to have these things in the arsenal just to protect the public's health, but we're not advocating the use of these. We're not pushing them on people.
You actually have to brush against the vegetation.
Yep.
Otherwise, you how would
To acquire the tick?
Yeah.
Yes.
So if you mow or, like they create a shoulder on your pathway, that at least would help.
Sure.
Okay. Terry?
Talk a lot about controlling the tick. I don't think it's ever going to be able to control the tick. What's being done in the vaccine?
That's not my purpose here. I can't answer that.
Does anybody have any ideas?
I think it's a long way off. Ed, maybe you know more about that. I think one of the points that you brought up is that we're not eliminating deer ticks, we're controlling them.
The better word is abatement, probably. We're baiting the ticks for a period of time. Okay.
There's an island community, Shelter Island, so we have a lot of tidal ponds surrounding waterways. What effect would these compounds, say, on the life use on the land, what effect would they have on the marine organisms and the aquifer also, leaching down into the ground?
They probably would have a major impact if improperly used. The label for carbaryl, because I'm more familiar with that, specifically prohibits its use within a certain distance of a wetland situation. Carbaryl is commonly used material for grub control on lawns, for agriculture, and I think that, and it's been around for 30 or 40 years, if we were going to see major impact to groundwater, we've seen it a long time ago. Use it judiciously. I mean, you don't apply it near a wetland because the ticks aren't there. So that's what I was trying to get at. The knowledge of where these ticks are and when you can go after them is absolutely critical.
I think another point you may want to bring up, people are already using these, like you said, general use pesticides. They're already being used for various other purposes, whether it be on lawns or whatever. So it's not like people aren't using these things right now. They're already being used. It's just that you're adding another pest onto the list of things they use for.
These compounds, with the exception of one that we tested permethrin in addition to Sevin and Duraspan, all have labels for tick control. They've had them for years. This is not new research that we've come up with. We just developed the timings and what stage we're going after to provide maximum control. But these are all registered. In fact, carbaryl now has a label for Ixodes damini. It's the only one that does have a label that says it's specifically can be used for this tick, where the others are just general tick control, and they're used throughout the country.
If I can add one more thing to what the gentleman said, there's an awful lot of pesticide applications being made now by turf and ornamental professional applicators without any knowledge of what they're doing. They're applying materials to lawns, they're applying materials to landscaping, anytime you call them up. So now we have a situation where a lot of the caricides are being applied in the environment for deer tick control and doing absolutely nothing. So the intent of this is to say, okay, here is the way to do it. So it's already being utilized out there, either by the homeowner or by professional applicators.
A neighbor of ours constantly uses spray, yellow flowers, and I honestly find that his area is conspicuously absent of birds. They're all over in our place, but we don't use any sprays. It's something to think about the toxic nature of the...
No, but the most important thing you said there was constantly applying chemicals. And if you constantly apply these materials,
So twice a year, I
you're
think.
going to have an impact on the environment. One of the things we didn't mention is that most of the non-target organisms that would be affected by one of these treatments would have multiple generations a year. We're not killing all the ticks, we're certainly not killing all the non-target organisms. So they'd be able to rebound and their populations would be fine after a while. The deer tick is a 2-year life cycle. So So we're only making a single application, taking out the only 2 stages that are capable of transmitting the spirochete with one application. I mean, it's a trade-off.
Did you find that the tick was more active at one time of the day than another?
We didn't look at that.
Nothing.
I think that with the health departments, they're doing really the testing on these water supplies, and so on. It really takes them years before they ever get around to coming up with tests for new chemicals, such as we're talking about here, being used. They don't really test for these things.
These are not new chemicals. These chemicals have been around for 30 years.
I know, but they still, I know the Suffolk County Water Department does not test for these drugs, for these chemicals at all.
Yes, they are testing, so carbon, yes. They are testing, yes.
Do you have the information for yourself?
The debate.
The aquifer.
No, that's totally out of my realm. I'm in the State Health Department Bureau of Disease Control, assigned just to do tick-borne diseases. I don't have any access to those. I mean, I could get them probably, but I'd have to fight the bureaucracy along the line. Okay, here's a member of the Suffolk County.
I'm sure that the DEC had issued a statement that there's no safe, effective pesticide against your
The DEC had issued that statement? I don't know, but it doesn't surprise me.
Be interested to see their data.
DEC generally responds to EPA data and the label claims on the can. And probably if they were reading that, or made that statement, they were referring to there's no specific label for Ixodes damni, probably. I haven't heard that statement, no.
Now you say there is
On 7, yeah. As of was last April or so.
Yes.
Why have we not addressed or encouraged the balance of the ecosystem by using gas credits next now to combat the overpopulation of mines and different types of bird species like the hens, sow that might be able to level off the tick population? Why are we only concentrating on synthetic harmful alternatives?
Well, okay. This is a long-term alternative, naturally. From a public health standpoint, it's something that we could use now if we needed to. This is part of the project that Congressman Hochberger was describing this morning, that is planned for Shelter Island. Economically, we don't have the funds. I'm not funded at all to do any work with ticks from the state government. In fact, we're down to bare bones. We have $4,000 left. I have to borrow money from somebody else's grant to keep my seasonal employees on this year. And the only thing the state pays us is my salary and our phone bills. So we don't have any budget to do stuff like this.
What kind of money do you require for that kind of research?
You-
Anything that's
you-
local here in Long Island to use to raise funds for that particular effort?
Well, that particular effort it will be accomplished on Shelter Island. The CDC funded that project. So I think to the tune of, and maybe, I think it's $429,000 for this project. We need equal amount of money to do it elsewhere, yeah.
If I could really address your specific question, is that generally speaking, natural controls don't take out a large enough number of the vector organism to have a public health impact. There's a lot of information in the newspapers and the magazines. I couldn't help but dodging guinea hens all the way out here, and because Christy Brinkley says they work, doesn't make it so. We need to look at long-term scientific studies. I mean, here's another example of, you think that guinea hens just eat ear ticks? They walk through an area and they take out everything. What about the impact on non-target organisms there? We need to know this, but it takes a long time to do. I mean, these studies are 3 years old and ongoing. It just doesn't happen overnight. What we were charged with is we need you to stop the cycle of transmission right now. And I believe that these chemicals are short-lived and that there'll be other techniques within 5 years, but we need something now.
This organism has been around since the early century, and all these cases
probably been here a long time, I think a lot of things that humans have done have really expanded the amount of disease. That's why I went through the effort I did about residential development. It's absolutely crystal clear to me that we're taking these people, putting them in a situation at risk, and then modifying the environment to enhance the Lyme disease transmission cycle. That may not be true on Shelter Island, but it certainly is in New Jersey.
It's true in most of Long Island, but getting back to how long has the tick been around and all that, we are seeing an expanding range of this tick. It is a new problem, because when I first came to Mishomic in 80 and started working, I would walk for hours to find 5 or 6 adult ticks. And when we finally found the 61 that yielded the organism in the fall of 81, we were able to collect 61 in one day's time. Now that was a very low population. Now you go down one of the trails at Mishomic, and we have spots where we know we can get 150 in a 3-meter area. We even mark them along the trails in certain areas. But Mishomic's not the only place on the island. It's just easy for us to get in and out of and do our work. We have seen it expand into Wildwood State Park. Very few ticks a couple years ago. Now we went out last week and collected, close to 2,000 nymphs. And normally I'd see maybe 3 or 4 nymphs on me during the entire season. I'll show you slides this afternoon that show this tick has expanded its range up the Hudson Valley and west of the Hudson Valley. And for a tick to spread several hundred miles in a matter of 5 or 6 years, that's a phenomenal rate of spread.
Change in climate primarily
We don't know, but I have one theory that may have some application, is that in the early 70s, when DDT was banned, DDT was a regular use pesticide for mosquito control on Long Island. In fact, Suffolk County, I think, was one of the major defendants in the trials for the use of it. So you relieve the pressure of DDT, and perhaps ticks were a non-target organism. In 72, we start seeing babesiosis and Lyme disease on the east end of Long Island beginning about 75. And since that time, vector control spraying has virtually ceased in Suffolk County. There are only 2 or 3 spots that are sprayed, and this is with a very, very safe compound. It's not even toxic. It's a bacterium. So we're seeing that these pressures of when the tick was a non-target organism have been relieved, and now we're getting an expansion. That's my theory. Is as good as anybody else's, I guess. But Bob, you had something you wanted to say on that.
I just want to say that Bob was very vocal, the tick and the disease for a long time. And all of a sudden, I can agree with it. It's not positive. And you just believe that this pressure of something like DDT allowed it to expand. And there was an optimum habitat out there. But at the same time, the deer had expanded greatly. This did not cause the expansion of the tick. They divided the habitat for this tick, and it did expand with that perfect habitat over a very large region. So it very quickly disseminated and expanded over the large river. There's very good records in places like Pennsylvania where they did surveys back in the early 80s. They had no contaminant, and now all of a sudden they have a lot of contaminant. Very good records that show that this has been an expansion, both in numbers and we just took advantage of this great environment.
Okay, I think if we can hold the rest of the questions for informal chat over lunch, Dr. McBride, the Commissioner of Health in Stamford, Connecticut, and also a board member of the LBF, would like to make a statement at this point in time.
This will only take about 20 minutes, so you can relax. It's on a serious note. I can sense, first of all, I know I'm preaching to the saved here when I say that we're all here and we're the most important people. Everyone in this room is the most important people in regards to the fight about and against Lyme disease. And the questions are very complex, not only from environmental side that we've talked about here, there are environmental concerns, but personal health concerns. And it's important that there be many points of view expressed. And along those lines, there has been circulated a newsletter called Lyme Treatment News that's been put on your tables from here to around. This publication is not a publication of the Lyme Foundation. It is not endorsed by the foundation, but it was allowed to be distributed in the spirit of allowing for free expression and information, for your information. There is no endorsement of this publication, and there is no endorsement and no recruitment, and neither does the foundation support the monetary contributions towards this. In fact, we have our own, if you want to contribute to the Lyme Foundation, here we have this young lady here who's ready to accept any checks payable to the Lyme Foundation. Moreover, and I won't comment on the contents of this newsletter, except in one part, the latter part, in regards to Jamie Forstner. I think all of those who've had the good fortune of working with the Forstners over the years, who know them or who know of them, grieve for the loss of Jamie. And I think that we feel the spirit and the loss of a family that's lost their child. And there's no deeper loss to a family. However, the information in this newsletter is in fact not only misinformation, but I tend not to be a person to look into the hearts of people. But if I had to look into the hearts of people, I would say it's at best insensitive. So with that information and with that, and the time is late, this meeting is adjourned.